Hi, thank you for tuning in. In the last video, we talked about the prophetic timeline of the first book of Nephi all the way up to the first chapter or the second chapter of the second book of Nephi. And to recap, the story of Nephi, which took place in the days of Isaiah and all that kind of stuff. Isaiah was generally a new book in these times, and they held his prophecies to heart. That's why the Book of Mormon actually quotes much of Isaiah throughout the book, and we could tell why it's such a important prophecy. But the first book of Nephi really covers in end time prophecy what is considered the great falling away. Our Bibles tell us, Paul wrote that before the coming of the Lord, there will be a great falling away, and not to be deceived. So many of the house of Israel will be denying the faith and preaching it as an angel of light, but in truly they do it falsely. And for those who have the eyes to see it, we are living in those times today, yet it has not yet been exposed. So we see that in the first book of Nephi, and basically when Nephi was commanded to build a boat and flee Jerusalem after getting the prophecies of his lineage and his fathers and the Torah and all that kind of stuff, his trip across sea to the Americas really represents the Great Tribulation. And we could see this kind of stuff even in our standard Gospels. When Jesus was on a boat in the Sea of Galilee, when he crossed to the other side, you could discern when reading in our Bibles that is a representation of the secular kingdom onto the celestial kingdom, so to speak, or the kingdom of heaven, so to speak. And so it was no different, Nephi's journey with his family to the Americas. That was the Great Tribulation. That was the great ship that we hear about in our Bibles. And of course, there's that picture when Nephi's brethren and their family were so rude and they went so astray from the Christ-like love of God that they even tied him to a ship in the storms. He was tied to the mast in raging seas. A very terrifying thing. So perhaps, this stuff has deep, profound prophetic revelation. Perhaps that represents a type of crucifixion in the Great Tribulation of maybe the two witnesses. We really don't know. But essentially, when we get into the second book of Nephi, when they finally cross onto the Americas, onto Mayan territory, it is a most sought after land, a most favored land, a most fruitful land, as you know, a most beautiful land. And so them coming onto the Americas is really a representation of the millennial reign. And when you start reading the first chapter of the second book of Nephi, you can clearly see millennial reign prophecy. This stuff isn't hard to see. But the second chapter of the second book of Nephi gets really interesting. It talks about Jacob, right? Lehi's son Jacob. And Jacob is actually a representation of Eve, believe it or not, the mother of all living. Now, yes, there's a male and female difference, but one day, which is a mystery to us, male and female will come together. So it's really interesting how Jacob in the second book of Nephi is a representation of the millennial Eve, the mother of all living. So the point of this video, now that we're caught up, what I really want to get into is the third chapter of the second book of Nephi. We actually can discern some amazing things. The third chapter of the second book of Nephi gets into the prophecy of Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith obtaining the Book of Mormon and hearing from God and his testimony was prophesied back then, and it's in the Book of Mormon. But we also learn something else, that his prophecy also comes with the return of Moses. And so And we learn that Joseph Smith and Moses, when Moses finally comes, they are actually related in blood lineage. And this stems all the way back to Joseph. So, Lehi's latest son, Joseph. So we learn, if for those who have the eyes to see this stuff, in the 3rd chapter, 2nd book of Nephi, yes, we have the prophecy of Joseph Smith obtaining his calling in the far future. And we also have a prophecy of the second coming of Moses tied into that prophecy, and the bringing forth of the Book of Mormon. And we learn that Joseph Smith and the second coming of Moses, these two people are related. And when we know our Bibles, of course, Moses and Elijah, they're all the same person, are forerunners of Christ. So they're all blood related. But it's interesting, this bloodline is through a branch that was broken off but will be redeemed. A righteous branch. A branch that was, according to the bloodline, not righteous, but through that Holy Spirit spark and their love of God, it turned righteous, it was redeemed. It's very interesting. It's kind of like Azakites, I believe we hear. From the family where Gideon came from, it's kind of the same story. It's a very profound thing. So we could discern this in the 3rd chapter, 2nd book of Nephi, that when Moses finally returns, he will be a blood relative to Joseph Smith. And Moses and Joseph Smith are blood relatives to Lehi's oldest son, Joseph. So I pray this is a blessing and edification. May the reader understand. Thank you for tuning in. Have a good day.